jo she wa da me de Kimba jo she be go go yo ne da she ai yo sa she be ye jo she me yo do da Let's take a moment and cultivate the altruistic motivation. We call it bodhicitta motivation, seeking complete enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of motivation, we should all participate in this Lamrim discourse, discourse on the stage of the path leading to enlightenment by Manjushri Lama Tsongkhapa. Allow me to read about a couple of pages from the Lamrim Chemo, the great treatise on the stage of path enlightenment, volume number 3 in the English translation, page 280, to give you the blessing of lineage, transmission, oral transmission, followed by explication.
这不带不是不带，那么现在老这边说到我里，你们别给我当同事，我到我那就会的。多成我的大街小的是这那到就我也就是不得懂的，得了这也没事，了做了的呢，现在就的也不能的呢。工作是叫我先生也了，后来我了的那个行动多吧，别人这那个不弄了的呢。健康啥，可能新鲜到不是送的头毛热，新头毛热新的别些不是抽。得了些新的让别对不得了，这我说明给小伙几百过年就是得了的呢。牛犊到你别朋友当不呢，就把的现在人都是新没现在也没样了。对吧？这边也没写到写送写现在那个人了，连这个都大家说对没呗。大把这一把人写对吧？大多不念，要不得这说的，现在了让给我这边这也那的都没说话。这个是那么的，看的那各种的让些没有这边这个。对么？听他看的呀，谁嘛这边些人让些没得不得了，新的那个说心当可乐的，说心当可乐的，是不老是不新的人了，听到让新这个不应的，这人了怎么他们不新的他们就当新的这人不新的呀，那么就这里就。七宝不得到下月里将这的叫说句真要到和尚给也了，那么我就这个我这边说说嘛一点，因为我婆婆的那不行的也跟我说是没把这叫的门卫些人，说就是嘛没有过来。मम्मी बे चेरे दा बे जो बे वर जो चरो तें दा तें बे शो नि ने खाशों ला शो ने वतर गे ये ला नम तें जो मे लो रे दे ला हे नि ने वतर ये ना तें ने जान मे दे बे दी ने वर वो जो सो दो ये ना वर ट्रबल दे बे चेरे दे बे पें जो ये वा zo में गोगी电子电话上的这个不是就人送把呢，送把不这样，跑路不得那个新节电不是送给县长给我的他们家了的，现在是不就都那边说叫没得的，这财经通信的就别跑到那别把现在个新大洋，让给老单点吧，就那。跑到的历经设置这么的，现在我的现在新的让个老刘说我这么说，过来们这边现在，这咱们这么没都历经拿的么的拿的那些不都现在也拿的么没得的让些他对吧？告诉现在。现在让给我呢，就这把老那个这把老的那个让一就别说一了，这样俺告诉别些，这样历经闹腾的不怎么谈，要不我这现在那样一变，人生意这边的么个说了么你那个说这么现在就能习惯了，现在你。原来见面的，原来见面那到的没有意思，现在这个没写什么。原来见面原来他天老就没，没有早现在这个没写的这原来错不怎么样，以前那个也写不这现在这个。现在这不你说得了新的呢，得了不老新的呢，让个那说咱们没得多，得了你日不的以后。 다 흉좀데 대사 다디사 슈카이 딱다시는 추구는 하디 뭐지 다다 이 텐주로다 다간지 이 네바니신 런주 켈레메네 고 텐주로다 런주니 챤다 런루를 가리 지즈당게스나 이네 텐주 지즈당게스 어디 베레 너 커서 이제 이버티 인소 세 지즈당네 따와질 제와네 대다 파바야세 지즈데 엄마 신부터라天上 路么的 니네 대다 강기 지즈당냐 내 텐주로 지지를 줘봐인 내가 알시에봐 타이랑 원이 저라 신고받다 대가발 코디나에 대해서 뭐롱아 시고 수티니라 예봐 셔워스 다 데레샤 거기다디 가자 문디시네 찹치아데까 이네 다 찹숑아 섬잠바다 두데바데까네 다 가자 타두도 텐주긴 도야 가자 타두 켈링기로 문이로디 랑지버려요 어디체 세다티시드 어디 레스 다디 가자 캡슈원 뭐야 돼 이디낭생리 무테시 이거죠 세다디 이거죠 디카르스도 봐 렘바트와 까자면 디펜도 말이지 까베 어디 이 차지 테바디 고리 틀링 예바데 뭐니 고레스 어디 테레 어디 예바데 뭐니 고리 세다 알리다티 송견을 하나
Phuntsok, got this.
이게 또 있는 페이지들 하고 휴진 또 있는 하고
So I think Islam might have went back and read from some parts. I was kind of lost where it started. So anyway, we are in volume number 3. Looks like chapter 22. I don't know whether in the Tibetan it's called chapter 22, but it's 22 labeled Analyzing a Chariot, right? That's the caption. And so what we have talked about before, just to recapitulate a little bit, is this: how do we differentiate between Sevatandika Madhyamikins, Uma Rangkyuba, and Prasangika Madhyamikins, Uma Tyengyuba in Tibetan? Okay? And so the one way, that critic has suggested is those who accept what is called autonomous syllogistic reasoning. These are the Sevatandika Madhyamikins, and those who don't accept such a syllogistic reasoning called autonomous syllogistic reasoning, these are the Prasangikas. Okay? So we have many different schools of thought here. But which particular school of thought or system that we primarily follow, if you ask, the response to that question is we usually follow the system of Prasangika Madhyamikins or Uma Tyengyuba. And so we have come quite a long way here in order to understand ultimate reality as it is, how everything actually exists. We have to make efforts to precisely identify what is being negated or what is being refuted. It's called object of negation or gakcha in Tibetan. And so we see two pitfalls here, if you will. One is, negating too much. Okay? So we have already been through that. If you negate too much, then what is the problem, here? And the other is not negating enough. Okay? And so we have been kind of following this trend of thought, where even if we look at the Chitta Matrins or the mind-only school of thought, their object of negation is, from Prasangika's point of view, not negating enough. Okay? So one of the main key points that we must pay attention to is this: that it's not enough to negate or refute true existence or Tembadruba. But in that negation, we should be able to assert, if you will, the functionality of things. Even though things are empty of true existence, still the things do exist and function as they do. So it's not enough to negate or refute true existence as the object of negation, but we must also have the certainty or assert how things exist conventionally and how they do function conventionally. So that is a central point to keep in our mind.
디디는 배제하서
Look, 답변제 경기 가봐서 again. That's 사제디.
사제디 되다. 런지부 대니기도 내가 대해서 다 티니 수주는 게서는 태교주는 게서.
어디 쉬게.
라.
예, 도나데 쉬게. 단단히 배제나게
삼비에 맞게. 배제 말하느냐?
Did you find that where it says that we should follow the system of prasangika? Let me see. Do we find it? 274. Well, that's no, that went too far. Because our starts at analyzing a chariot. That's way down. Is it 274? Oh my gosh. So Geshe went way back there. Okay, so it's even before analyzing chariot. Okay, so last time we stopped at 280 and now we went back to, okay, so 274, is it? You mean the last paragraph? Oh yes, the last, I think, sentence as a matter of fact says, accordingly, it is apparent that you should accept the Prasangika position as explained above, I think. Okay, so that takes us to the next one. So it's like we are kind of, how should I say, maybe review. Let's consider it as analyzing a chariot. Let's do it again. Get it papen and Kazan the Shanlonskin.
There's a woman around Rashimi Kelly, repair. Number that was Lobundin shown among the someone the Papa Yafsi shown the shown the Shindy Jibaton is looked Kelly at the Daman and Arshiva Dar. Can you short Kel and go but no? So that is under any Ronjuba that Lindaji, any Shawl soda. Karakama like that, Lobun was a Gomatinum aware of the and do that. Danda tengu lo dengi dependent dawada sanji jan dependent dawada wa shede ji ene lo lo kono shun pa takji shi de zan ene danda sanji jan dependent daya so ba de sheda lo shun de tengu dos no sheda de just no we are using te no.
So as a matter of fact, it's the last paragraph on page 275. So what Geshe states is that, of course, Arya Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom treatise has been elucidated or commented upon by a number of scholars, including great Indian master Baba Viveka, okay, and others. But the one that we follow, as we say, when we say we follow the system Prasangika Madhyamikans, is we follow the elucidation of Nagarjuna's work by great masters such as Buddhapalita and Chandrakirti, because their elucidation of Nagarjuna's work is considered as precise and authentic. Compared to that of Baba Viveka's elucidation or some other masters.
That is the Jerub did and the Sanjing the David Nayadi, Tenul Shingo Ceremony. And Lobo shown them a Kong rebel and Padizan and a team show to
So the reason why we say that we will follow the commentaries and illustrations of Buddhapalita and Chandrakirti is not because of some kind of biased attitude towards Prasangika, because it is the top school considered. Because if we really look at the way they explained following rationality or reasoning, so they really did, if you will, the best job of elucidating Nagarjuna's thoughts.
Oh, that's some Shiva Teladene, Star Gula Jewe, Sul, some Consa Damadan Fava, Chui, Dame, then about Tawa de Combi, River Bunzi loss. What is the Sumba Shiva Teladene, the middle, the Shiva Sena? In it, Dame Del Bishiki, shown the that and the Sanji Jan, the daughter of it, 你这我说吧，我听兄弟呢，人大剧里就看这几个人是我说吧，
No, sure.
现在什么是的了呀？人看啥单位点了发些，学单位点了发些，
No,
你第一点了发啥啥，那我们这把蹦子是的，
no,
我
sure.
的什么意思？
So, okay, so those of you who have the electronic version, now the caption of the chapter, so to speak, in English reads, Analyzing a Chariot, is labeled 22 chapter, and the main, the point is how to use that procedure to generate the right philosophical view within your mind stream. Following that procedure, meaning by following the ways of Buddha Palita and Chandrakirti, how can we cultivate the right view within our mind? And so that has been explained under 3 subpoints. Subpoint number 1 is establishing what called the selflessness of a person. And number 2 is establishing no self or the selflessness of phenomena. And subpoint 3 is how to get rid of afflictive emotions and cognitive obscurations, realizing these selflessnesses, if you will.
我到唐伯了什么是个，大让西面我点了发发些，那大是大那个你呢，大让西面我点了日光天个，那那个让西面我点把些，他日光天那现了家是，他第一个人去他们家了把人家当家些，去什么，我在在的唐伯的你别个我当同了家，是他别现在个我同了家些。 唐伯呢用这很多长把来，大家叫对一什缺一，缺呢大家话也，有些部分得到的，得了先前有嘛，其他人那上的现在呢，第一部分呢，工作是不是写叫写一两个人那，考了什么点新的多吧变在呢，因为碰碰那了点，讲个大个先前大把送呗，他们新的呗。平地白写不少是，但这里呀，康萨单位点了，他们呢，单位单位个呢，新的当地在呢，民间那些呢，特别贵呢，康萨单位点了发写的这些都当位呀，新的白的送过一次。
No, sure. So we're on top of page 278, and so first, as we said, we will establish no self in the person or selflessness of a person. And so that is again discussed under 3 sub-points. So number 1 is how there is no self of a person, and number 2 is if there is no such thing as intrinsically existent self of a person, then by the same reason or by concordant reasoning, we can also see that there is no such thing as intrinsically existent mind. Right? If there is no I, there cannot be intrinsically existent mind. Yeah? And then the third one is applying the lines of reasoning to other phenomena. Yeah? And so now going back to the subpoint 1, how there is no self in a person, or talk about the selflessness of a person, it is done by way of giving examples and then dealing with the actual meaning that is exemplified by the example. Okay? So what is the example here? Given in the middle of the page, there is a citation from Chandrakirti's explanation of the middle way, and so the example that Chandrakirti has uses is that of a chariot, shingda in Tibetan, horse-drawn cart. That's what the Tibetan word says, a chariot. So if you look at the 7 different parts of a chariot, okay, is there such thing as a substantive chariot? We cannot find. A chariot is unfindable as we do this 7-part investigation analysis, and that's the example used to establish that there is no self in a person, intrinsically existent self in a person.
我到这里，你现在上西面都有点把这里这把帮，每个前把的一个呢，准备出 tela tene tawa jili che peyun no sta dire karsa hinda kora tambor hinda kora peti pa rajime dogro de tawe tema she ta tele yang yo zeba she zero tene mengi chebaji go ni drive choose ta tela tene new de tawa nibe peyun no oda hinde pala tene ene da go rajime drove ene tawa ni gres odi ta cheba she peyun drove tele ti petele tene khaza da me da she ti to res ti peyun ti team.
Towards the bottom of page 278, as you find the layout of several subpoints there. So number one, we look at the example itself, a chariot in its 7 different aspects of the parts. When we analyze it, we don't find anything that is intrinsically existent. Okay? And so once we establish the lack of intrinsic existence of a chariot, maybe some might raise objections. Those objections need to be addressed. So that's called eliminating the objections to that very viewpoint. And then the third one is how the chariot exists under different labels or the names. And the fourth one is once we understand the example well, how a chariot does not exist in and of itself intrinsically, then that reasoning will help us to be able to understand the actual meanings which refer to the selflessness of a person and also selflessness of phenomena. And so in other words, understanding that example will facilitate us to understand and realize the two selflessnesses, selflessness of a person and selflessness of phenomena.
That the petty, Tamotella, and Jubalis, Hinda Raila, the Shimu, Yella, that developed the Miamishin, here, Hinda Yella, Le, Jig dance, that country Hindalia, Namdu was your Jig dance, Jig mines, any Raji to be 30 mines, and it 30 so do the 30 zero country. Hinda rang lale hindu me se tade me se heme mai se adi ene tere karsa thoda ba ene thoda ba tere he mai ba mai se dan he re di thoda ba he ma re se adi se ta tinde se di ta ene hinda yan la ding go ro di chig re tinde yang men sing yan la me se ta yan la di hinda da se de mai se yenla hinda yenla temba tongdamba hinda yenla temba yenla de hinda temba shi pendi tembe choni tije ta zubasi de tana madribe nega rules ye debasi ye me shi kyono ta hinde ye shi odi de tana tela ya indigo namdu yiri basi wa ta kanje
no da dün se de gal ke dün da bar chik me chik che
la hinda de hinda da shenla yela ni jidang ki karsa de he mai sa de la karsa de ro yela hinda ran la he mai sa de de yela tade mai sa de ro tade mai sa de tade re de ro wa tel thongda ba he
de samal ya gakta tendam jago ro
odita tel thonu jago hinda yan tade ro wa 저와 대신에 되어와 그래서 동담바 해만
찍만 있을라 던담 자고
찍만 있습니다 동동 자고 말이 그런 지단에 신다를 연락 찍 말아 자고 말아 다 신다 연락 돼야지
다 돼서야지 던담 자고 다때 파주 때마다 던담
자고 밥때 니어다 신다 연락 돼 대주로래 준주부지가 파지 된 거라 때문에 좋은 있으나 신다 연락 때마다 연락 신다 때 니로
시제나
다 시래서 yenla ta ter mesine ane deba ta meside da sozum dere
deba dela ta tandam jaur jamal ke
deba dela tozum jago mari shinde yenla bongja de shinde de o marwa
la re di yib de ra
yeba ja jago tozum jago marwa
la re
ta din sa se
ta chik samas ke
la
chik ba sometimes you can't get all the 7 that's what say the nge pa shu so ro ke ane 가서 신다디 찍 많이 쓰되 양라의 신다 찍 많이 쓰 된담 자 먹었지 와 제발 다 타데에서 랑신 타데 메시지를 된담 자로 신다 랑기 양라를 tempo 디 된담 때요 그래서 양라의 수 tempo 디 된담 뭐 시제
다 손따다 차서 덴바체도 신다 연락은 내 바시. 다들 조건을 신다.
저기 땜바데 알 땜바데 그냥 가가셔고.
댄스도 때 표지 때 말아. 댄스도 잖아 레진 거다 내가 맥던 데가 세.
알아 신다라 연락.
신다 연락 요러와. 어디서 신다 연락 돼. 다시 뉴타 사서. 어디.
Okay, so on top of page 279 is the citation from Chandrakirti's commentary on the middle way, which is under the caption subpoint, those who use electronic version, showing that the chariot exists imputedly without intrinsic existence. So that's the subpoint title. So now we are trying to look at the example itself, a chariot. So we said if we investigate a chariot in its seven parts, we will not find a chariot that exists intrinsically. Okay, so that is the what called the bottom line message. So what are the 7-part investigation that we are doing? Number one, a chariot is not identical with its parts. It's not one with its parts, meaning it is not identical with its parts. Are you with me? This one we don't need to use the qualifying term intrinsically one with. Okay? Are you with me so far? One. Then the second one is a chariot and its parts are conventionally distinctive and different, right? But they are not distinctive, they are not intrinsically different, okay, or distinctive from one another. So here we use the qualifying term intrinsically. Okay. 2. The 3, a chariot conventionally depends upon its parts for its existence, right? But it does not intrinsically depends upon its parts. Neither do its parts intrinsically depend upon a chariot per se. So 2 more, right? That's 4. Okay. Then number 5 is a chariot possesses parts. You know, it's not a partless entity. It possesses parts conventionally, but it does not intrinsically has or owns or possesses its parts. So here intrinsic is again a qualifying term here. So that should be 5. Number 6, that a chariot is not just a collection of its parts. We don't need to use a qualifying term, right? If we think about this may be my footnote, I should say. He didn't say it, so, but if things go wrong, I'm responsible, my footnote, translators. If you dismantle all the parts of the chariot and heap them together, that collection is not a chariot, as we can see. Okay? 6. Number 7 is neither is the shape of the chariot, the shape itself, that circular thing or whatever, is a chariot. So those are the 7 parts of a chariot. So when we investigate a chariot in its 7 aspects or the parts, we do not find anything that is intrinsically chariot or that exists intrinsically as a chariot.
다 세다 신다다다 다 넘버 누구 제는 그지 러시 좀은 넘버 누구 제 누구는 이거 와 세다다 어디 많이 보인다 이 신다 러시 저요 말이스 이 신다 러시 말로나나 이 신다 그런 게 신대 저하신 이 가리 도월 기아도 가리는 사지가 같아요 봐 어디 나시 강사 러시 말로나 이 비게 사지가 같아요 딱 빼자다는 티인사리
If a chariot were to exist in or itself intrinsically, then it would have to be findable under that 7-fold investigation analysis, right? When we look at whether the chariot is the collection of its parts, whether it is the one dependent upon its parts, or whether it is one with its parts, whatever. So when we investigate a chariot in those 7 ways, we do not find anything, that we can point at. Well, here it is, intrinsically here, right? So what that tells us, investigation, is that a chariot lacks intrinsic existence. Okay? But nonetheless, a chariot exists and it functions. It can carry baggage and us also to its destination, right? It can still function as it is. So in the same way, even though there is no intrinsic self in persons, us, but persons do exist. Self does exist, and it exists conventionally. It functions, right? No.
다디 건가 싱대들 가지 레레가 누지되고 빨리 싱다 랑 연라다 찌이나 애니 싱다데 싱대 연라서야 탄이 사고 말아 지금 지야요 말아 어디 누지되고 그러와 내가 나지 있는 랑신 집에 타디이나 레메 동시에 되세요 까부 나시리고 디나 애니 싱대 연라도 싱대 차시리고 말아 동시에 다 가가 쉬고 것은 피지고 말아 간지 남디 레레라야 네버 레레 때네 애니 두고레스
So if something exists intrinsically with regard to a chariot, then there are lots of fallacies, that arise. For example, if a chariot were to be identically one with its parts, then we will not be able to, differentiate between a chariot and its different parts. They would be identically one, right? They would be just this, one. Yeah? But if a chariot and its parts were to be intrinsically different, apart, then they would not have any kind of a relationship. They could not, have, it's just like we're talking about a pillar and a vase somewhere, right? A pillar and a vase, have nothing to do with each other, really, for its existence. So this is how a lot of, inconsistencies or the fallacies arise.
대 가서 어떻게 가서 라소 바세 디메베서 딱바자임베 디게도 다 풍부히 되다 송소 선들 힘다랑 무저랑 희유는 노메서와 잭다 타디서 나버딘 가룬드 랑희유 예메체베 리베 조고발레 두버칸 대다 가룬드야 디 마저베 체 랑희 메도사 두버시메데 아니 랑희 요마레스 relα 타텔 디나 마셰브 숭고이서 텔 싱다이 랑예라 소힌소다 소힌도 콜로도 서부 라소바오 싱다이 랑예라다 라이지 직마인데 직이는 예라테는 두번 직이는 다 ene tade demi jeksewa da ji ji na ene de yela tuma yewa na ya ni hingda tuma yoga ya ba ni hingda ji ba na shi yela de ge jik mo shi me shi o de ta go ro adi ne ba de te ni se da hingda tuma ji wa dang sa hingda rang yela hingda ji yi ba de yu da de re hingda ji yu dong shi hingda tuma ta wa ji da 가서 yela ji ta wa de shi 다 얘가 더마이바 힌디 싱다야 에네 더만 주리 찌기네다.
No.
그러봐. 어디 다 디네바 인도도. 어디 두어서.
So we are on page 279, the third paragraph from the top, where the sentence reads, the parts of a chariot are the axle, the wheels, the nails, etc. Sakishala's explanation with regard to that is, we know that conventionally a chariot has different parts. It has the axle, it's the wheel, it's the nail, it's the rim and the spokes and everything else. But if a chariot were to be identical with its parts, then we cannot talk about many parts of a chariot. Either they all have to be just one, like a chariot is a one, right? Single phenomenon. They would all have to be just one, which they are not. Yeah. Or if a chariot and its parts were to be intrinsically different, just as there are many parts, then we have to say a chariot itself is multiple phenomena. It's not just one entity, and which again makes no sense. Nobody will say that a chariot is as many as its parts, right? And so those are the fallacies pointed out.
메도시 에지컬스 히다 티시 걸사 지기는 티시 다 싱다랑 남당 지 걸사 싱다연라랑 인지 많이데 지기는 연라되는 두만도 바이베시 싱다 두만지와다 연라지 딘도사로 지요와 당 시바도 레 就的叫所拥有的是，但现代人了的，你现代时代这样的连的小不多了，这个呢，一点连的小不，一直下有嘛是吧？我的。
So if a chariot and its parts were to be intrinsically identical one or intrinsically different, then those are the problems that arises. And so if we apply the same kind of logic to agent and actions, then we won't be able to differentiate between agent and action, because they have to be identically one, or they are, how to say, independently different. They have nothing to do with each other.
Oh, that Ranshin Tribute Shin, Tetriwa, that because Jimmy in the Pumba, Nambishi, the Yanla, Shendu, Yangar, so maybe Joa Le, Mamusis, that Jimmy Tadi and Jimmy Tadi in a couple of nights. Any Shingda, Shingda, Yena did it say, so then you go to a dinia, your maris.
And if a chariot and its parts were intrinsically different, then when we look for a chariot, we should be able to find a chariot intrinsically existent that's different from its parts, which we cannot find it. So the example given is that of a pot and a piece of cloth, or earlier we said just like a pillar and a vase, because these are two different entities and they are not dependent upon each other for their existence.
What the Kasa David Hoshin Jewish, that they be showing in the Hinda Yela, the Yela Hinda, in the Karjon short never that. So never rang Yela Namdang and then the Mela Rendel Legion never darcy Yela Nani, then a junk made it in Rangu, you so you know, Trubali, they may be sure. But then they show you say, Hinda Yela, Deba, the Yela Hinda Deba in the and the Karjon says that. The Hindu surgery, the Jajus and the Hindus immediately. Didn't you so your Hindu, the Karjun so your what did you think is that the Hinda, the Yela in the Yela puppy in the Hinda say, your Marwa. What did you say that in the Digumundus?
And so the second paragraph from the bottom up on page 279. So what we find stated there is, yes, conventionally a chariot is dependent upon its parts are dependent upon the chariot, but intrinsically they are not, and they could not. And if intrinsically they depend upon each other, then they have to be very distinctive from each other, just like we can say, I think here the translation is, a yogurt and the container that holds the yogurt, right? At least yogurt is not the container is not yogurt. They're distinctive. We know that, right? We can see that, or we can put anything in a container. But a chariot and its parts are not as distinctive as that,
No, there's that never that male, render legend never Tarian, made it that the music within the mood had it in the Render legend never said it is renders and the dress a drat the course to inside compare. But then it did the data legend, the desert, the Yikatoya, the legend, the data is a yara. And then they but the thing to say the next year.
And if a chariot and its parts were dependent upon each other intrinsically, then we should be able to find a chariot distinctive from its parts, or its parts distinctive from the chariot. And again, another example given is like that of a Devdada in his house or a tent, right? If we're looking for a Devdada and somebody says, hey, he is in that tent, well, we can go and find Devdada, because Devdada is not a tent and tent is not Devdada, because, I mean, as silly as we could say that, but, it should be like that.
What is that? David on the Kazu, they are pretty you was a mungo get there at them, run sing to Bogobo. Was that Goya goes in any Shinda thing 땡그 말이 라고 말이 연락 신다 땡그 말이 세우면 신다 연락 덴바 말이 라고 말이 동동 이켜버리자니 가고 말이 군소도 가고 말이지.
No. So the key here, what we are really talking about is this, that conventionally we know, nobody is saying that a chariot is not dependent upon its parts, or a chariot does not possesses or has parts. Nobody is saying that. But the issue here is that intrinsically or ultimately a chariot is not dependent upon its part. Ultimately or intrinsically it has no parts, if you will. So that is what we're talking about. The ultimate existence, which is, I don't know how much sense we convey in English, tambar in Tibetan, or other word we use intrinsically, is the issue here. Nothing is intrinsically existent.
근데 다 삐죽이 송바테 양 파르부터다 그런 생이 때다 뭐 저비야 때는 현다 거버데 닌다 탐지 대신이 쉐버 샤오스 데브르다 단다 데르 간지 무직변 된지 직세 무타데 니셰서 어디 해야 돼 제바 시우드다네 네 티 가롱진 로고르스 세트 제바 시다 강갈라 직타데 시야 직바레스
So the investigation that we look at here, what it is saying in a nutshell, that if a chariot and its parts were to exist, then let's say intrinsically, either they would have to be intrinsically one or identical, one and the same thing, or they would have to exist intrinsically separate or different entities, because there's no third way of existence, is it? Either they have to be identical or they have to be distinctive. There is no third option here for existence.
어디지 가서 덴베 초게 메데데 데다 리지 동신디 제베 팔란데 팔란다데 바시디 신다라가 예라데 바데네 네 팔란다 리지 소제베 테도 시디데 신다야 예라 소소 지고 데베시 테다네 덴바 메도 스테레다 디로 가서 덴바디 랑시 저서나 इन लीजी नोर द देश लीजी नोर से लीजी नोर फाजू इन जीमु करे ना कोई सोसो दे आयोरवा ता हिंदा द हिंदे यला नि फिन दे तो सोसो हिंदा यला मे हिंदा कोना जीवल यला से जी से यला मे हिंदा दा yang यला दे कोरे हिंदा से कोई खर्च न वजे खाठे ने हिंदा रे वो मुझे यला तो जागे रे आयो मारवा ओदी रे मारे से
So the main idea that's being refuted here is that there is no intrinsic reality or existence, and we use a chariot as an example to illustrate or demonstrate that very notion, that a chariot exists conventionally, and conventionally it possesses its parts, it's dependent upon its parts, but ultimately or intrinsically it does not, and if intrinsically a chariot and its parts were to be distinctive, then they would have to be like a Devdada and his wealth, right? If we say Devdada is a rich man, right? Then we say, what does he own? Well, in ancient time, own a lot of oxen, they were rich. So we can say Devdada and his resources are distinctive, isn't it? But a chariot, its parts are not as distinctive as that. If we dismantle all its parts, then this is not chariot. Because chariot is dependent upon its parts, and its parts are dependent upon that whole idea or the concept of chariot.
Oh, dear, so, because Liji North, Liji so the year, and the Hinda Yana there, but in the Tondaba in the Yana, the Marzi, Tondaba Yana, Devayena. anything Liji the North of the day I even Hinda the Hinda Yana, Hinda Pasha, Yana lost Yana Meval Hinda Yago, or Tita, Timeza, in the Tondaba Rashi, Rashi to be any Teresa or Demba Maris.
The shooting. So Gisela kind of repeated it, that if a chariot and its parts were to be intrinsically separate or distinctive or different, then they would have to be as distinctive as Devdada and his wealth. or as distinctive as a pot and a cloth, or as distinctive as a pillar and a vase, but they are not.
What did you guys that legion now the dentist said, did it, northern they said, go tatty within the shed. She now the dentist said, go within. Or dinner in the Shevataki, in the Shinda Yana, never my dead or go tat Jibagon and demo mine, Rashi Tribi. Mujiba, Rajiba, Mujiban Jing, which in the Shinda, the Shinda Yala, Jiria. Didn't they have your Marwa?
Then there is the example of Devdada and his ears, possessors, It's kind of strange to say in English, It doesn't seem strange in Tibetan. I don't know what it is, maybe just in me. So why we are using too many different examples here, you must be wondering. When we talk about Devdada and his wealth, we say Devdada is a rich man, has a lot of wealth. The wealth is something separate entity, something separate from Devdada. Devdada is a person, and wealth is a resources, isn't it? So we can say Devdada possesses wealth, but not intrinsically. Then what about the different parts of the Devdada? Because which is part of him, right? His ear is not like his, bank balance, that's part of him. Well, that ear is again not something intrinsically attached to Devdada, or Devdada does not possess those ears. Hopefully he has 2 ears, intrinsically.
The day I'm not going to day, Legion, the tiny Mungo, but that Hindaya, Hindaya, Yimbe, singing to be. And the Bongo was that in Hindayana, they said, Tondamayana, Nigma, Samaduji, Chita Hindayana, Nigma, Lagomar.
So the bottom line message that is being driven throughout this is that a chariot, yes, conventionally has parts, possesses parts, dependent upon the parts, but not ultimately, not intrinsically.
What did that Mungo goes because the go show Laman. Sita Sholamatu Sozuno, Sobe Yavindiro. Sholaman Yine, get the Sodu Hinda Yen, Sibunil Hinda Yinjur. Conjayela made the Yena, the Meve, yet the Hinda Rigma, Shevatar, Yena Sobazanda, Yena Yev Kevache, Hinda Goba, Yinso. Tell the Hinda Rang, Yena Sodu de Meteto, Della Yile, regarding Goa. And then Yena Colala Soba Cheni, Sibur never none. Sibur never the Masama Meva Sobana, and Sonaya, Hinda Yoba Jordis, Yela Soba Hinda Bita, Yela Sodu Hinda in Hinda food the magic in the Yela Zitorni, Teja Yapung Yavadil, the Hinda Yoravas, the Hinda Yela Yoravas, this is regarding your Joa. There is regarding God, you're not so colorless of a train, Sibu never Hinda church. You're not so some Hinda ambition. You could kill on the task over here. Kill on the gate, you see. That they run the over you're not major, you're not divata here, Tetana, you're not young, never jode, you're not Jamie, she wrote, Yena Deva maybe Yena Soba Hinda Minjur. Hinda the Rela Soba Yembe, Goba Lobun D, Hebe Chever Jomugote, Soba Hinde, Dahimbe, Pungola Soba Dahimbe, Dadi Mono Sumbe so. Kete Yena Soba the Hinda Minde Baina, Sandera. Bishop Kela Givan, they run the Gobomans, Yena Jenny Medis, Hindashi. Yena Divata Davis, the civil negal, Yena Divati Yoris. Did the Yena the Meva Jordis, Hinda Mavis, the Hinda da Yela Tondamba in the China, Tadi did your Tadi Demi Chingura. Hinda Meva, the Yela Sibu Yela Meva do this war. Hinda Yana Kakasha, your Majorero. What is the Hinda Yela Bung has a girl in Hinda Yela Mea, the Hinda Mavis is a things.
Alone, alone. 32 them Chabajago.
I don't know.
만다기 그냥 초보 삼들 전담 제바 자고 말을 좀
소보던 자고 말아. 디스가 시분들 희가 릭바든 교화된 거 같은데 소보던 신다이나 인 신대 예나 대세우 봉샤드자는 디디자는 신다요 왔다. 신대 예나 예외실라 그러.
뭐를
그래.
네.
어디서서 동타고 유나 다 속dom디 신다 가서 예나 소보던 신다이나 다 데레 네 가서 데스고르와 이 속dom디 낚시 속dom디 낚시 많이나 데 서로 딱비 신다도 딱 주시 속dom디 신대데 낚시래 되어라. 어디서나 이제도 거기
낚시 다전이지.
낚시 되게 많으시고 더 답아줘서나.
So on page 280, like the top part, where in our sevenfold investigation of a chariot to find out whether it exists intrinsically or not, one of the parts is that a mere collection of its parts is not a chariot, right? And if it were, and then there's no need for the labor to fit all the parts into its places and make a chariot, because it just would be chariot, already. That couldn't be the case. Moreover, that collection of its parts constitute the basis for labeling or imputing a chariot, isn't it? A chariot is an imputed phenomenon or reality, whereas the collection of its parts is the basis for the labeling or imputation. So what is labeled cannot be, its own basis, and because so if a chariot and its parts were to exist intrinsically, then the basis of imputation or labeling and what's labeled onto that becomes identically one. We cannot differentiate. We cannot say, well, that's the basis of labeling, and this is the label. We cannot, talk that way.
초등신다고 어tel 동동 제바자고 말이지. 그래서 초등의 신대 닭이라고 해서 닭이 닭이 대교화해서 동담하고 말이지.
No, sure. Even conventionally speaking, a mere collection of different parts of something does not make that something, isn't it? Right? A mere collection of the parts of a chariot does not make a chariot, because those are the materials, if you will, to build a chariot or to make a chariot. And that even conventionally, we don't have to use the qualifying term intrinsically or ultimately here.
이미 유진 가르쳐는 풍부 속바 다히 임베스 다도면은 순부터 현달이야 아니 디자 강사 풍부 속바 되는 강사 말이디 풍부의 강사 다히 되시 다히 다히 가야로 주 될 저다 신다 초존의 신다 마인드 될 지버레스.
So how does that apply to the actual concept? When we talk about a mere collection of the parts of a chariot is the basis for labeling, but it's not the chariot, right? Now, when we apply that example, if it's a sense, to the actual meaning is that a person is labeled onto collection of his or her aggregates, isn't it? So the collection of aggregate is not the person. It is the basis for imputation. And person is what's imputed onto that, just like a chariot is imputed onto, collection of its parts.
다 그때 얘가 속파의 신다면데 있지. 얘가 되는 리뷰티기 앱체바디 신다조냐는 내가 날 얘가 지메와 데비 얘가 지메와 주시스 다 속배 앱디 있잖아. 속배 앱디 지다 데려오러 가서 소리도 거 지금 그다 내가 얘가 매번 데비 얘가 매번 주시스 앱디 매번 주시스 얘가 앱 잠시 신다는 조바 미리서 해 좋은데 계랑 받는 야오 뭐가 소바점 신다면은 마세 버제와 우선 초선 신다 마이면 마세 이네 소베 예 신다 마리스 다들 제는 잔 예 신다 이네 예 마디베 네가다 디베 예가래 이네 디 예라도 예 쳐봐 요래 마리스 아니 개발 요마 리나다 마디다다 거기 간다 신대 컬러도 신나랑자 되고 봐 리디 그런 소다 간디 랑자 되고 뭐든 조려 요마라 어디 조려면서 셰도 가서 되서 그래 예 개발지 동아요 말이지 예 개발지 동아요는 이니 신대 컬러도 스파 세브도 그런 세브고 파샴샤나 세브라네 이니 야나 세브레 뭐지 야와도 데 샴비로 세우니 개발해야지 가요 말아 어디 셰도 디 연락 그런 딩나다 머리나 그런 예도 랑자 그런 랑자 되어레스 제가 시부가디 예도 레그문도 와시 디마는 지 데켜나 예디 레그 말와시 그 예디 유주친요 말와시 다다다 리바셔야 되어와 가자 예디 가자 마인데 데 다디 가 어려 데 힘달데 제야면데 어디 디시우다 다 가자 제인데 전에 예 가자 마인데 로고고 가자 제도 소고 말아 예서 소고 봐
알로로바 어델로 된다면 개발 자고고 요 말고
자고 뭐 예디 가자 제도 힘달라 힘대 예들어 힘대 예들 가자 가자 힘대 레고 말아 와지 동동 자고 말아
And the last part of the sevenfold investigation of a chariot is, whether or not the shape of a chariot is the chariot, right? And I mean, even conventionally, I think nobody calls that shape itself per se a chariot, And so if shape is regarded as chariot, and then a number of questions that could be raised is, are you talking about the shape of all the different parts put together, right? Whatever that shape is. If that's what you're calling a chariot, or the shape of the distinctive parts of the, distinct parts that constitute the chariot, But in a sense, that the shapes of the different parts do not change. And the example Geshe says is, you could use a nail. Well, whether the nail is just, kept as a nail, or it is pounded into the wood, it stays a nail. It's not going to become something else, The wood, whatever the shape is, that the distinctive shape, it, stays that, and so nothing is being changed here. And so how that applies to the actual concept is shape of a person, right? The answer is no. Why? Because the shape is a form. A person is not a form. Yeah.
어디 그래서 신대 예비 지도잖아. 리그 예비 신대 차지 연하지래요, 그렇죠? 그렇죠? 신대 다시래요, 그렇죠? 제가 당기는 다시 뒤로 버티는
And the shape of that whole chariot is actually a part of the basis of labeling, isn't it? When you fit all the different parts of a chariot and then looks like a chariot, that's a part of the basis of labeling. It's not the chariot.
어디 도동 개발 자무고세. 걔데 덴버 메베 초발에 때니 데메지 예순 도바 메다베 메반데나 오늘 머리바다 사원라사베 메데베 길에 때니 되지 누굴라사바 리브 덴바 메바 탐지 짱 깨와라 테바 메바 누거디 최기 데니 시든 되어 됐든 메데베 길에 때니 리브 넘버 메데 랑신지 탐지 짱니 깨와 셰바지 셰 소바타로 신대 밴디네 그래서 메베 소바를 때니 데메지 예순 도바 메타베 메바 되나 오늘 마릭바당 사본라서베 메데베 줄레 때니 뒤시 누굴라서 리브 데바 메바 탐지 깨와 메타바 메바 되거데 그래서 되거데 최이 데데 메데바이 줄라데시 리브 나바 메데상세 탐지견이 셰바지 셰소모 따로사 다 데바 메나 이는 리브 샤지 탐지 태그레스야 된사리
그렇죠.
그걸 어디에다 메데바 길 데브나마 메데시야리 데바 메나 샤지 태그레스 다 킹다 탁탁노데 니드잔데 니야야마 니야메 데바 메바 토로 데바 메나 이니 킹데가 샤와스다 샤와 가지가 내그레스
그렇죠.
머리바에 이니 데다 다 가지 신앙이 덴데네 리브 좀 여러 어디에다 디 좀요 말이스
머리바도 직선 되게 쉬워. gen chabe gen chomja kyo me wa gen
La.
mari ba jik song gen mari ba ko gen chomja kyo me mar wa gen
Uno marik ba to samun la saba medebe gyola teni. Duji eta nyugu la saba dribu demba mewa ba tamji ke kyawa medeba mewa do gode. Kyo yi dene chidan udo da medeba yu gyola teni dribu nama mede. Tamji kyan kyawa shewa ji she somba taro wasa. Tena reja reji. Kanji gyundre namsha dhuganga demba togo mare, shingda demba togo mare sayadire shata.
gen chabe shokran gen chomja kyo mar wa gen
La.
gen chabe shokran chomja kyo mar wa gen
Da
rangja peder wa gen
kashi
mari
dadade nome, tangi gozu nome no dadade cha nome.
mari ba de wa gen ngan mari ba sen min du khajar gen shwa
Tangi gozu sa yate
tanda
shya.
de gen tanda de shana so wa gen
Da gade sobe ye shingda ma isya.
Ola de wa gen sobe yin singda mari se jor wa gen
Ore ta di jo sa do.
di samdal gen mari ba
Ti jo de ma ane kaze soba da den demi ye do ba me de me ba de na. Ono se da ane soba de she soba ye de shingda de den de tak be yude ta ni shawo de shana de karsa. Me ba de na marik ba da ono marik ba da sawon la sa ba sila do. Marik ba se na yude she sawon la she yude se kaje yude ke se she wa.
no mari ba da saben la khajar sken
La.
I think Geshe is explaining something that I don't have it. I wonder if he
So the
skipped a page or my eyes are so bad that I don't see it right under my nose. I don't know what's happening. So it's not just my eyes. I think Geshe Phuntsok is under his nose. He doesn't see it either. So no, I think we are on page 280 as far as I know. Say it again. Oh, I see. Yeah. Maybe that's what I'm thinking. His page may be out of order. Although what he said makes sense, so don't think that I didn't understand what he said. It's just that I couldn't find the passage here. Right? I'm trying to look at it. I'm sorry. Bear with me.
Nido di sobe ye hingdar ye mo go gagzala kebar jam go so ti duel.
Tanda de ka chuwa thilen so do again. Kisi ene ka so
Di ta choa sin di jul yung go ta.
chuwa de sabar again. Di chuwa thangbo de ya kisi ene di khasa chokba di ene khasa di singda yiban na sala ro again. Ane ka so ko singde ki 차시 레레기 어디 겐 디사로 와게 디랜드 사로 와게
디랜사레
안디 오더 와게
다 디올
민도 와게
시부네 속좀들자 다 속배 예 디올 틴 속배 예 민도에
어디 와도 속배 입도 와게
어다 예고디가 다랑네
기 속배 입디 엔 가서 겐단다
디 속배 예디 싱다 임 가서 싱다 고발라 돈은 키워 자고 말이지 속배 예디 싱다 다히레스
단게 머리 받지 손서디 민도
다 디차데 디 다히레스 라사르와 디차데 단다디 티줄 가리용 거든 디줄 다 가서 다다 머리 받아스 디줄 가르도서나 게테 데바 메바서 게테 데바 메베 속발을 때니 데메 예수 노바 메타바 메바데나
겐 관다 겐 디도 겐 도지시 간주 인지 들어가게 단다디 겐기 이놈아 단다 티와트는 당고 사르와게 디 샴데 제대 간리아 단다 판덴 다웨기 우마주베 겐 룽스도 와게
어도 미데바 길데신시야
나디 속바레레기 가서 디 딩말 칠라버 와게 디 마치네 게 아니 디 와달라 아니 단다 가서 양디 와래 반데 데베기 겐 룽스도 와게 겐 겐 룽망부도 와게 겐
룽데 룽데 다다델라
반데 데베기 룽치니 숨니 루틱 디 쇼데 양 디스도게
데 룽데도 최인데 니시다 되다 메데바 길데니 리브나바미 Rangshinji, Tamsi, Java, Shivaji said, the Banin de Longrodi. Here's some Bataros, Dimagimadi.
I think
That's
something.
independent, so
Okay, I'll stop doing this part and we'll follow what he was explaining. And I think there's somewhere I couldn't find at all. I mean, it's not either he jumped a page or we missing a page. I don't know. Again, when I thought the gang the Marie with the youngsters and the gang, the sugar the money again, the Torskin.
did it, because they did it, then immediate Dover made them a dinner, Conjeta, and they mentioned the Sajiti on the Mariba, the Sabula soba, made them by Gyeltsen, then Geshe, Nugulas, Ribu Deba Meba, Tamji, Yang, Jawal, made them ever do good, this is that they could do it. That Rebecca, the Tontamal, Lucy, the years of it, no, and Maribet and the Digilas of Didi Namsha, the cheese, how the Gangal, then any cheese, how one dribble to Nugulas of the any Meva Karsa. Meva in a ticket in the Zumbaka and do it, because did it. What time did you go meet them and Meva and do good? This is what Tontama Martin Jang in the tiny detail the Kenyan race. In the church, she didn't church, then she didn't do it at the Medeba Gyeltsen. Driven number made this the Ranshinji, Tanji and Shiva key, here's some Motaros, then the Pane de Longrodakaji, the Mamena, you need to take this at the
So I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll translate what Geshe said, and then hopefully we can locate that passage another time. So what we have really gone through is with that example of a chariot, how a chariot does not intrinsically exist. If it were to exist intrinsically, then when we applied that sevenfold investigative analysis, we would have to find something that's a chariot, but we couldn't find anything. So what that means is that conventionally a chariot exists, conventionally it's dependent upon its parts, and conventionally it functions as a chariot. It can carry you, it can carry baggage, whatever, so it exists. So nobody is denying the existence of a chariot because chariot does exist, it functions as a chariot. Okay? And so what all that thing shows is that a chariot exists dependently, not intrinsically and ultimately, and its functionality is embedded in the interdependent origination, if you will. Okay? And so then where I said I couldn't find the passage because Geshe was going into this whole other thing is where when we look at both external and internal phenomena, right? External phenomena such as a seed, when it meets with its favorable condition, it sprouts, and then it germinates, it sprouts, and it grows, right? And all of those things happen conventionally and dependently. A seed does not produce intrinsically a sprout, and that grows into a plant or tree, right? There's no such thing. But all of those things exist and conventionally and function as they are. Now, if you look internally, how we have come into cyclic samsara is because of the 12 links of interdependent origination, right? Because of ignorance, and there is a karmic formation, and that leaves imprints on the consciousness, and the rest of the things kicks in, and all of these things works fine conventionally and dependently, and this is why all the cause and effect relationship exists and outcomes exist. But intrinsically, there is nothing such as intrinsically ignorance producing karmic formation and karmic formation leaving intrinsically its imprints on the consciousness, and consciousness carry intrinsically its imprints and all of the rest of the things. So what that shows is things exist conventionally, things exist dependently, and it is in that framework things perform their functions. Okay, so that's. So we will. So again, for me, it's page 280 again here, and then we will see where. 282. Sorry, yes, 282. You said, and then Geshe says we yield to you for any clarifications, any questions that you have. We need to do.
This isn't really a question, but it's an example. Picture a freight train that's passing by. One of the cars is a flatbed that carries lumber, materials, or a container, and instead the participant observed a platoon of soldiers marching on the flatbed car. Like a chariot, it has a purpose, a normal purpose, and the observer questions another observer, what in the world is that happening on that flatbed? He says, no, that's not a flatbed, is the answer. It's a MCSF. Oh, what's an MCSF? It's a mechanized carrier soldier foot. So that's how functionality is not real reality.
Okay, I'll do as best I could to tell that to Geshe for his understanding. The Quran di tiwas ke mensa. The Quran samju rubji da tanda di nganju Quran di tendi go serwa da nganju de kharsore sun de di bana ani singda di jidang kaza da tanye de yore tanye do ani Quran ge chaje tego sa jorwa ge. Dige di do insa de sa da nganju de wa bana really chala organ yorwa ge. Da mangmi to organ yorwa ge. In zam nganju tanan thongjo ge ji yungdo wa ji ge di kaza karine chala de ngom hadu de karre se gal dile ji len jabin gorwa ge. Jaza ngom ne ju ta de gal ya phige kaza yujeng ngon de ta dan ji da rwa ge. Yu khana karime de thola ta dan dam de de yungo rwa se ge. On de sa ge. Ko ta as ko samji re do. Yeah, Geshe feels that in that example, it's our perceptions really play kind of very important role here, right? Because there is an interaction between our subjective perceptions and realities, and how we perceive them and how we construe them. So that I think that is a part of the story here as we deal with how things actually exist and how they appear to exist to our perceptions. Any other thoughts, questions? So, yeah, thank you.
It started out stating that the purpose of this exercise is to determine that there is no self, nothing.
Yes.
Does this also help inform our bodhicitta motivation?
Okay.
This understanding of non-self.
Sure. Kurang kan dishe de dirishe da tanda de shingde gi pela teni da kansa gi ta me barwa gen ta do be kansa yomas gi barwa gen sa dinde gi kowa de da ta me shembe de gi so barwa gen de gi ane chanju sem gi kulong karso da kongbe ta ya da ke da dinde le ya ko de war chyo penda ya yo mare sa ke ta me shembe de gi wa chanju sem gi kulong ke da an ko ji pa kongbe che do yomas
dame to so na da de chanju sem ji ning je shi ba gangal ndo yu spen to omo ji ba ga de ba karsa tel je ta chidu ya ne jin ba to ning je de ba shi se ba go ji de yo shi ro je yo zo ba shou shi ba na ko ba shi sa de ya ji se ke be ge ro de ye ba cha si de da dong yi dong na ning je de chanju sem da ni ganga yung ge ya jo ma re
게 토베데 슈크처로 세즈로 바게
re di shou de ge si
이네 인지의 전주심 기업을 내가 또 과했게 말로. 그러면 그 펜로치고 사이즈로.
펜도 다 고째서는 건지 과 되네. 이本东西多是的当东西的我那也把要不一的当那这三木东东的东西是吧？但别吃这个我马上那你叫希望人生节生东西大节都是些的这个么的是，因吃这种样日报东样这我地生活中呢，因现在也见着多是。
라 일라 데버 탐제 투베 셰르 텐소 로 차로. 디르 차로. Yes, Geshe recited some passages from Chandrakirti's supplement to the Middle Way Madhyamika Avatar, Umajukba. just to substantiate the point that yes, if we do realize or understand no self in a person or selflessness of a person, that could facilitate cultivating compassion and bodhicitta and strengthening and how should you say, furthering them. But at the same time, he wants to say that there is no need to understand selflessness in order to cultivate compassion and bodhicitta. But if we do understand or realize selflessness, that can facilitate those positive attitudes growth and development. So that's why he recited the whole passages, just to substantiate that point.
지동 대셔도 그래서 특징은 정수sem다 돈이도 해라니는 인디 명대 건강 고인이 배세운 것도 어디죠.
So from Mahayana perspective, if you were to have these two things, bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness, because of these two qualities, all other qualities as if like magnetized, they come to you, because wisdom and bodhicitta, right, that are very essential qualities, Any other thoughts? Yeah, can give to, let me.
What about a slightly different argument? I'm not sure if this works, but the wheels are not the chariot. We can, for establishing that the chariot and its parts are not intrinsically the same. The wheels are not the chariot, and neither of the parts we can say easily are not chariots. So in that sense, they are all non-chariots.
Yes.
The wheels are non-chariots. So the question would be, how is it possible for a collection of non-chariots to make a chariot? That would be the same as, let's say, a herd of cows being a horse. I don't know.
Right. Okay. Koran condition the answer that under daily also shinda namdi ribeje roage. Any shinda gi ta chashe redine the shinda male roage. Alai chara benada kaso di kaso kolo de shinda male any kaso da segalo so roage. Sidio kala chashe redine shinda mendio kala shinda mai bachegi and sama do ni shinda cha roage. Shinda mai ba shadaji ya do shedi shinda cha roage.
Shinda mai ko soon do the hinda charo.
Charu was that the country is a penal dinner charo chudo again. And because of Tama in Pujuma, which is doing the work, or touch habits or working. So the charo to the country chicken as again. Sing the mind by Shata Yard do should sing the charo ready.
This is my Dilla Ganga Yang, Hinda Mai, but Ganga Kanjumazu rules and the Hinda Chamarwa. No, Hinda Juruan Gora. Rictum concerts the 10 of Zinzomni. In the more top than things you do, Gormata, Kanjumazi music, what is this child?
This is where in the cause-effect relationship where we talk about concordant factors, right? That you are right, that every part of the chariot is a non-chariot. So it's like all these non-chariot entities put together become a chariot. But that doesn't mean that anything and everything that is a non-chariot, if you bring them together, it will become a chariot. Because that whole idea goes to about the notion of concordant factors and discordant factors. Even in cause and effect relationship, right? Every kind of cause cannot produce every kind of a result because that has to be what we call riktumba, concordant correlational factors. Yeah.
Argument establishes the lack of intrinsic difference or identity, I should say, of the chariot and its parts. Is this the same? Does it have the same power as the other arguments presented here?
Right.
Is it meaningful as an argument to prove that the chariot and its parts are not intrinsically the same?
Right. This is the tanda di kata rikpa dirwage. Chiju kaliya ane tanda di karuso gore singda dan singda ke chashe dige tanga rwage. An rangshin rube chi mares kolab chogo rwa zagrwage. Karuso gore singde chashe singda mai be chashe mangoji dyuni singda cha rwage. Chiju kata singda da singde chashe de rangshin rube chi mares tade mares sa rwage. Ko rikpa di nigalu juru gore sko.
Da singda da singde yaga ni chi mai sa de de wa tongdong chewa jawo marwa. 다 힘이 있어. 다디세 돈도 비켜 잡으러. 힘이라 히라 다디로.
In the analysis, the way we used to understand is that when we say that a chariot and its parts are not identically one or the same, we don't need to use the qualifying term intrinsic here. But when we say that a chariot and its parts are, how should I say, different or separate, then the qualifying term becomes important. So that.
And about this, the whole notion of being intrinsically one or different,
Right.
It's kind of abstract. So I wonder if I'm understanding it correctly, that to be intrinsically one with something else, one thing with another thing, would be to be identical in every regard. So that, for example, a chariot and the parts of the chariot would be different expressions referring to the same entity. Is this, am I understanding correctly? Okay, again, to be intrinsically one with something else,
Yes.
would be to be identical in every regard.
Every
These
regard,
two things,
yes.
every regard.
Yes.
So that a chariot and its parts,
Uh-huh.
these would be two different expressions referring to the same entity.
Yeah, okay, yes, okay, I'll go back. Akoran this ko da nang ngang ge ge rangshin do be chig ina sa cha ro ba ge. A shing da rang ge ani cha she de rangshin do be chig yin ba ina ro ba ge. Di ko den di chi dang ge chig de ma le sa de me de ro ba ge. Cha tham jen chig yin gu so ba. Yin ba ina ani ge shing da la ba da shing de gi cha she la ba ni ko chig ka ga be che se ma don da ji ko go go ro ge. Ji bu ji cha go so.
직 이세도 타데 때문에 쓰고로 답변은 타데 때문에 직 장 쓰고로 봐.
차 tham jen
직
chig.
코라 찍으로 늘 차이 코라 찍 뭐죠 타데입니다. 어디니 쓰고 봐. 지도 힘다다 힘대 영화니 타데 여러 와.
라로 봐.
여 시다 타데 들이야 어제 키워 자고 됐어.
No.
직 들을 자고 말씀도.
No. Tama Quran chi condition di ke ta rangshin rube chik res la be na ro ge ko chi da ne ka so re di ke ben ka so ge nga zo de chu bo da ni de chik res sa de man ja ro ge cha tham je ne chik ro ge sur ka ne de be ne ro ge chik i be ko den de ro wa so ro ge rangshin rube chik cha na ro ge
이제 찍이나 거두이나 찍 코나 실마 이지 깨현다 제 제바자네 야자 가지 시는 코나 유저 따라 따야 매
la ro di ro ge ta di yin ba yin na so ro ge se de ka la sing da la ba da sing de cha she la ba di ta jo ba min da ba ro ge
라 어디
sing da la ba de sing de cha she la ba ni ko jo ba min da ba ro wa 이 jo ba min da ba yin na ine ko den di chi ko chi kyang go go ro wa sa da rang shi de be chi yin ro ge sing de cha she la ne sing da lo go go sing da la ne sing de cha she lo go ka ko rang shi de be chi cha de ro wa sa don da de ka de de go ro ge
어디
don da di
로이트베 찍세드 찍이나 타데 때문에 찍이나 다
ta min ga de ta na ma da ko ko sa de chi ral ko go
찍다고 다 거기 힘다데 히데나 찍이나 있는 거찍 힘대영라 찍 힘대
la be ko yo ma
라바 코라 야마라 찍으라고 와
sing de cha she la ne sing da re
뭐 찍으라고
I want to make sure that people understand what we say. That's right. I think if a chariot in parts were to be identically one means one in all respects. So except for these different expressions, right, we can say a chariot or parts, they must refer to the same thing. As a matter of fact, we cannot say different in a sense, right? It's referring to the same thing. Yeah. Very good. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, why aren't only the two?
Yeah.
One
Sure,
last. Only the two, the first two arguments that not identically the same or different. Isn't that sufficient to establish lack of intrinsic existence
need
of
all
the
the
chariots?
five rest
Yeah.
of it, right?
Why
Yeah,
not just the first two? Aren't they sufficient?
Sure. Then again, 남주 변화 이것이 가서 다 찍다 타대서 저러 와게. 아니 라신주베 찍 만약 그것이 시루나로 와게. 다 찍다 타대 가능 인고 알아서 와게. 제가 아니 라신주베 이나면 라신주베 찍다 라신주베 타대 가능으로 베세로 와게. 다지 가운데 맨날 고 라신 먼저부터 하고 그러와서. 제대로 딜 항마 리바가도 주요로 와게. 이제 제 과에도 가려서 왔다. 근데 라신주베 찍래 라신주베 타대래서람나 아니 그 캡도 무슨 정말 캡도 요마로 해서 와게.
참여래
이제 그 디상바 되게 되냐고 욕망 쉐도 와게. 아니 아주 촉바디 찍레베 디 입대 찍레베 파낭을 땜바데레베 마데바데레 찍 라요 와게. 때 막부터 랍고 가려서 와게.
다다 랍도 야고시 디스고다 찍 다데 지나 찍 다데 유나 찍 다데 가루에 차려와
나오.
디 차나 다 데바드나 유나 데베드베 찍 되지 다데 가루에 차려와
몰라로와.
다디 찍 다데 가루인데 매소는 아니 힘을 다 짜르데 찍 다데 가다 유나 찍 다데 가루에 다 데바 민두세 예와니디 찍다니 니가 내가 또 사 뒤줄로 용거라.
몰라로와
어디요?
이놈아도 저도 그거 되게 찍다 타다니 그거 캡고 옆에 나로 봐게 답은 남들 그거 찍어로 와
어디?
그래서 막 내가 과야면도 배나 디 가서 싱다데다 싱다 차셔야 돼 랑시르베 찍래 랑시르베 타데레슬람나 코 아니 랑시 머리보다 하고 그러 봐서
어디?
다디 메메지게 아니 가서 싱다데야 야라 요르베 서가로 봐 야라 뎀바르베 서가로 촉바잠데 찍레베 서가로 난 야고 뭐 시고 봐게
뒷가에서 도박하면서 싱다코는 샤시에도 들어줘야 되는 왔다. 싱대 연락해야 돼. 서브다 애니 송싱해야 돼. 여러 와.
no
저도 그런 좋아한다 그런 야 들어 찍다니 찍다들이 아니 로스 요르베스 게제니리 오라.
no 달라 다고 제가 10 잡으셔도 돼요. 맞아요. 디는 튀겨로다.
어디 튀고.
Yeah, I mean, in general sense, that the logic about if something exists, it must exist as a single phenomenon or multiple, right? So we can use the same. If something were to exist intrinsically, it would have to be intrinsically one entity or intrinsically different entity. So that logic would subsume everything. But the reason why we have this all other things, right? It is a part of going into more minutiae details, right? If we say they are intrinsically different, then we can look at which part of the chariot, right? Is it the wheel? Is it the nail? Is the shape? Is the collection, right? That's how it's more details, you know. But that logic, yeah, subsumes everything. All right, thank you very much. And I think I have to get the help of Geshe Phuntsok here because I am mostly out of town these days, so I don't know where we are in terms of announcements. Yamantaka, retreat, Yamantaka, solitary Yamantaka retreat. Those who have received the Yamantaka empowerment and those who have, who are willing to do the retreat. So it starts from August 11 and for 15 days. Did you say 15 or? So August 30th, 30 would be the fire puja day. So for August 11 to that, so I don't know how many signed up or will have time to do that. So that's one announcement. We're just reminding you. Tadi kasa tanda gen konje jikje baje ke samsti go rwage. Chukji ne sumje ba. Tadi bodo sa nyama sungje de nyama ngajo ken jone nang do samsro. Ke sungje na sa nyama. Sungje sa
didi
leron de sungje yeme nang ge mem na gen.
저 다니 좋아하는 내리들 최시야 라자 샤워를 샤워도
가서 꽂자고 봐. So you're sitting this year. So the retreat will keep going, but on the Sundays the teaching will continue. Okay, because that's good for the people who retreat too, right? And then there are many who may not be able to do the retreats. Our Sunday teachings will continue, and Geshe laws, Geshes, two Geshes will continue it. I will be out of country, so go back to calm abiding section of the Lamrim. Okay, any other announcements? September what? Okay, September 10th, his Eminent Song Rinpoche will be here. Anyway, we will, I think, repeat that later. So it's in September, right? So we are looking forward to that. Thank you very much. And here is a prayer request. Paul Fitzgibbon second again 30 So prayer has been requested for Paul Fitzgibbon, who passed away on the 25th of this month. So I'm sure many others have passed away. Do we know or we don't know? So let's do some dedication prayers for them. Generous dedication. Chadong Golun Yuve, Yavodon, Jendong Gava Sambe, Sanje Dong, Kala Konde, Dela, Dedamba, Zumba Chere, Sela, Chanze, Omani Beme, 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 Omani Beme. Omani Beme Hore Gawa Di Yodo Da Jere Sewan Rujone Rowa Chijamal Deye Sala Gobar Kange Lode Timye Dende Ninda Namda Razebe Chinye Dungu Jije Seje Nije Duga Leba Mada Sebe Zara Mare Mendo Dume Kisebe Rozo Kola Goje Yala Roje Yangden So Roda Cheto Yumo Leye Jaro Reze Mare Meze Dume Nyugo Chinye Jeze Rade Dene Daje Saje Daze Yende Lunzo Jese Tuyo Chuda Chuda Chunye Yende Dalo Meze Jambe Yala De Omarabada Nadi Omarabada Nandi Zende Chuye Yera Veze Yen Dalo Timo Mimba Rasene Kada Teje Shungo To Lode Bowe Sendo Zo Lode Jaze Yuzhong Pega Di Yasa Kongwe Jido Mimba Tenpan Zinla Wangdo Jishebe Changye Shogun Chala So could you start Manjushri prayer?
Nhất tâm kính lễ Đức Văn Thù Sư Lợi, bậc đại trí ngày điều phục hai chướng ngại, được nhật quang lan tỏa khắp mười phương, bậc thực chính chân ngưỡng bầu rốt ráo, từ thiên hải bát chỉ sinh thủ hộ diệt màu, cõi luân hồi chúng sinh thọ nghiệp báo, bị ngăn che bởi quyền hạ vô minh, sở hữu 60 pháp âm thủ thắng, cùng đại bi ngày hóa độ chúng sinh, thừa từng mẫu lo cho quý tử, tiếng rồng vang ngày thức tỉnh hữu tình, khắp vào vòng luân hồi nghiệp chướng, gương trí tuệ ngày chẳng đức vô minh, chân điện muôn ngàn khổ đau cùng gánh hạ, truyền tử Như Lai tối thắng toàn giác, ngày an trụ nơi thật sự pháp vân, báo thân ngày trang nghiêm thanh tịnh, 112 tướng hạng Như Lai, đê đầu đảnh lễ Đức Văn Thù Sư Lợi, cúi xin ngài tận diệt ám chướng vô minh, ông Marapasa ngài điện, con khẩn cầu dưới bước chân bậc đại trí, ban pháp lực diệt quyền hạ vô minh, được trí sáng con thâm nhập những màu, pháp những việc và vô dạng. Hàng hiển can thiên ông mặt tỏ hương, hồng danh ngày khắp mười phương quảng bá, đấng thiện xảo uy dũng bảo tổng, bậc ô giá. Nam mô Lô Giang Ten Tinh Quan Đốc, sinh phụ những từ
Hallelujah. chang ju sen jo ren bo che ma je ba na je jo ye wa nyam ba me wa yang ko ne ko pe wa jo dong ye da wa ren bo che ma je ba na je jo ye wa nyam ba me wa yang ko ne ai yo sa ji de je ju je me do da ri ra mi je yin de yan ba de san je yin do min de vi wa yi lu ge nan da xin la xue ba yo gang de ra ve guo ve xin gang de ben dan de wa ma lue zhong ve 现在是往天津江州也下边水的天军日一当古如着那忙着那个你要当